All right, we're ready to go.
All right, we call the meeting to order. First thing on the agenda is to approve the minutes from July 14th. Have a motion from
I'll make a motion.
Second, Nightingale.
motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Yes. We have no appointments. Ms. Fidler, you're
Good evening. Just a couple of things that I'll highlight on the report. In regards to the data analyst position, we're still working through the hiring process. Based on civil service dates for orientation, it looks like it's going to be September 7th that our employee is going to start. That's our tentative date right now. He's going through the background process and fingerprinting right now. And then he will start working on both discovery and training with Ecolis simultaneously, because we obviously are on a tight timeline with regards to the GIS. In regards to call processing, so we just did a refresh on our phone system back in the end of June. And one of the things that came with that was a really great recording system. And one of the items we've been tracking is our answer rate. And as you can see from the report, we're staff doing phenomenal in regards to call volume and answering and meeting our standards. They're actually exceeding the standards.
Where are we seeing it, please?
So that's under quality assurance, you see call processing
Okay.
under July. So we're at a
Oh, okay.
96.13 and the standard is 95.
Of calls answered, or they?
Yeah, so they have to be answered less, the 911 calls need to be answered in less than 15 seconds.
Oh,
to meet the
okay.
standard.
Okay.
And with all the overtime and mandated time that staff spends forced with, unfortunately, again this summer, yeah, they're doing an excellent job. With grants, we just finally closed out our SEEK 18 and the SEEK 20. I'm still waiting on that award announcement. I'm not sure what the delay is, but we do have a 911 coordinator conference coming up where we actually get to see our state reps face to face. So hopefully we can get some clarification on what's going on with the grants, because not only are we awaiting that award announcement, but we're also awaiting the RFAs for the 21 grants.
Similar to the grant you just got, that you had budgeted for, is this in the same position? If
This
you get this, it will be on the anticipated
That's correct.
revenue.
I think Lynn did budget a small amount, hoping we would get some grant funding, but when I say small amount, I think she budgeted maybe 250,000, and the SEEK grant is generally between 700,000 and 800,000. If you would have asked me a couple of months ago, I would have probably told you that we would have had that announcement. I'm not sure why it's so delayed.
You know why she didn't budget for it? Because it was at risk.
Because, yeah, with COVID, and we just had no idea what was coming on the horizon, so.
Okay.
The communication system, I just wanted to keep this on there because we really are continuing to deal with some, equipment issues. And that's really just generally the age of the equipment. We're hitting that 10-year mark, and that's the lifespan of some of the UPS equipment, the generator equipment, the core, the Motorola equipment. That's obviously a lot more stable, and the longevity of that is, the age of that is roughly 20 years. So we should be good for a while with the Motorola equipment. But that supportive infrastructure is, we're starting to see a lot of issues with it. We did just replace a couple of the batteries in the UPS units at 3 other sites, but we still got 10 more to go. And I added on here, I did send 3 different proposals and some information on that to Lynn and Eileen. Just maybe we can use stimulus funding. The total, I think, was about 360,000 for all 3 sites. And that might be well spent money to get those taken care of before, during the year we're contending with those issues. I think that's all I have for now. Is there anyone has any questions?
If there are any questions, we'll move right along. And Lloyd Hoskins is on. I don't see him, but we have his report. Dr. Duckett, no updates. Mr. Lumen, no updates. I don't see them on the call.
I can speak, if there's no objection, I can speak on his
Oh.
behalf, if that's okay. The only update I have is that we did receive a letter from Division of Criminal Justice Services indicating that the $242,000 plus dollar amount for the Discovery Reform Grant has been approved, so that should be hitting the budget line soon.
That's the one we
Correct.
accepted and had all the debate about. Okay, all right,
Yeah.
great.
Thank you.
Any questions or anything? Right along then. I would imagine it's on the call. Okay.
Everybody's at the lake.
What's that?
Everybody's at the lake.
Yeah, I haven't moved up the order this fast in a long time. No resolutions this evening. I did send a report. No real updates on the ATI board at this time. We plan on our third quarter meeting in September. Formats to be determined. We'll kind of see how all the COVID stuff rolls. The senior typist position remains vacant. I did set up an interview with one of our two new candidates this evening. I hope to reach out to another candidate before the end of the night. That's really starting to kind of cause us some issues as we're getting more work in from the courts. So getting that filled is urgent. I did try introduce a little information, perhaps a little early, but looking into the 2022 budget. And I know there's going to be a long time for us to kick around some of this, but I wanted to give the committee a little insight into some of the critical things that the department's going to need moving forward. So at the end of 2019, we were able to take over 3 vehicles for the first time, 2 retired sheriff's vehicles, and then the former administrator's vehicle. We get a lot of use out of those. We put probably 95% or more of our miles into those vehicles since that time. It's allowed the officers to be more professional in the field, not running the personal vehicles around. It reduces their individual risk by having county-owned vehicles. We have a better uniform equipment in each of the vehicle. Part of the problem is they do not have the car-mounted radios. And there are dead areas in the county that our handheld radios are not powerful enough to really get out of. And this is a safety risk to the officers. So I've talked to Dale a little bit, and it's possible that EMO is going to be applying for a grant in the fall that he can slide us into that would fund these radios. If that's not possible, I am going to be asking for money in our budget. If we can get 1 a year, get a couple, at least to start to get these vehicles properly equipped, it's the next logical step, and it will help our officers be safer and maintain better communications to get these radios. We do have handheld radios now for all of the officers. They're the current generation of radios. They're good radios, but like Denise was saying, all equipment ages. We've had to replace some of our batteries. We had an inventory of spare batteries. We pretty much exhausted that. They're not cheap. They're about $250 a battery. That was the last time I purchased some. And we would need potentially up to a dozen of those. To have a small inventory, 4 or 5, is still going to be about $1,000. These are costs for modern equipment that the department has not traditionally had in the past. But it's something we're going to have to continue to ask to be supported and maintained. The department has not had electronic monitoring as an alternative sanction for either new sentences or in response to violations in about 15 years. Technology has changed substantially. I've had a couple of talks with the DA and with our judges. They would like probation to have this available. And this is something that I think I'm going to need to talk to the body about a little bit and to bring you more information about what modern costs are. So this one I'm just sort of bringing forward to start the conversation. There are a variety of models statewide for how electronic monitoring services are provided. The offender can pay for the service, the county can assume the cost. What level of service do we want to anticipate? If we are going to look at an offender pay model, we would have to engage with the county attorney because we may need to adopt a local law to authorize collection of these fees. Prior county attorney and I had a conversation. He didn't want to go down this road because it could then also obligate the county to have to pursue offenders civilly because these fees cannot be collected criminally for offenders that don't pay. So there's a lot of implications. There's a lot of education that we need for this. So again, I'm just kind of starting this conversation off, and I'll be happy to bring more information forward. I've talked a little bit over the last several years about there's going to be a generational shift in the department, and we're on the cusp of that. The officers are discussing their intention of retiring next year. These will be a lot of your senior staff, both of your supervisors, 2 out of 3 senior probation officers, and your older line POs. That means a lot of retraining, a lot of promotions, and a lot of instability in the department over what's probably going to be about a 4-year period of time. 2022 is going to be the start. And until all of the older staff are out the door, and certainly not everybody's going to leave immediately, some will stay longer than others. But from what I'm understanding from the staff, most of them tend to retire when they are eligible. And this will be about 6 POs within the next 4 years. And that includes myself. I will be eligible to retire in the spring of 2023. Plans with some of these other people may impact my plans because I will not be able to leave a department that doesn't have someone qualified to be promoted from supervisor to director. So again, I'm bringing this to the body's attention. These things are going to begin to happen. Training a new probation officer is now approximately $4,000 per officer. That's more than my annual training budget is most years. To equip a new probation officer is now also several $1,000s in expenses that the county has not traditionally had to bear because it's been such a long period between hirings and because we now equip our officers differently. A new individually measured ballistic vest is now about $1,000 per officer. Some of that we're able to get under grants that the sheriff's department administers, and we greatly appreciate that. But depending on when these people leave and when the grants are renewed, we may have to end up paying that out of the department budget. So again, these are things that I'm bringing to the body's attention. So it doesn't come as a surprise at some point down the road when I say, hey, all of a sudden I'm going to need $12,000 to train 3 new officers, because that's substantially more than we normally ask for as a training budget. And the other bullet point under budget is psychological testing. This is something that I asked the previous HR director, and I mean Mike, not Lisa. It's part of our current job specifications, but it has not been budgeted up to this point. The reason I'm asking for this is it's a modern professional approach to hiring individuals who are going to be tasked with carrying firearms. I believe the sheriff's office requires psychologicals. I believe our police does. It would bring us into consistent practice with the rest of the county as far as our officers who are in the community working with firearms. I believe it's time, and I would advocate strongly for it. And I will talk to Ms. Marinelli and the chair and our representative when we get into budget talks about what financially that may entail. In summation, folks, this kind of is the price for modernizing the probation department. And some of these things, again, are not costs that we have asked for or asked for in a very long time. Some are new. But I believe it's things that I'm going to need to ask for support on to continue to keep the department up to modern practice and move us a little bit more up to date in practice statewide. I'd be happy to answer any questions related to that. The only other bullet point for this evening is COVID practice, and we're in compliance with all the current guidelines. Everybody's working back in the office, of course. Fortunately, everybody's maintained good health, so we're good.
This is just a curious question. Do you send these, you have a contract with someone who does the psychological testing, someone in the community you contract with, is that how it's,
We utilize public safety psychology in Albany.
okay?
They have done it remotely during COVID, but generally we used to actually send the candidate to Albany one day. They do the psychological exam and the interview there.
And you pay that particular entity for the service?
We do, I think it's about $350 per psychological exam, but they do psychological examinations for a number of law enforcement agencies, and I would assume probation departments throughout the state.
There's also a provider in Monroe County that many of the law enforcement agencies, probation included in that region, use. And again, this is something I certainly will be bringing information forward about and looking at our options. And the sheriff and I have had a couple of conversations about this casually over a period of time, but it is time we get consistent countywide, and I'm sure the county attorney may also have some opinions about whether or not this is a good idea.
So Jay, you'll ask if other counties who have electronic monitoring actually assess this fee to them, to their, I mean, obviously if no one's doing it, then it might not make a
The
lot.
models are all over statewide, varies county by county. So in some jurisdictions, the county just pays for it because they consider it a cost of doing business. And in some ways, it's easier. There are some counties where they do invoice the offender, and it's their expectation that the offender pays. Sometimes they pay the probation department. In some circumstances, there are now electronic monitoring service providers where the offender can pay the service provider directly, which is also a much neater model because it gets the county potentially off the hook for having to pursue that individual civilly if they don't pay.
No financial assessment of who can pay and who cannot, or it's just
We would have
one
to,
size fits all.
again, the models vary. And most counties that assess the offender have a sliding scale. Unless you're going to be happy with a fairly modest rate of reimbursement, in which case you probably get a rate set fee. Those may be some of the expectations that we need to discuss.
Heidi, you were.
Jay, I have a couple of questions. I'll start from the top of your report and down. Regarding the equipment, the communication equipment in the cars, is it your intention to look at equipping the cars or updating the handheld equipment, or both?
Well, there currently is no equipment in the cars.
Okay.
So what we would like would be a radio mounted in the vehicle that is equivalent to function with our trunk system. Yep. And the handheld units all of our handheld units right now are fine. It's just we need spare batteries. Okay. Like anything else, do $250 to $300 per battery. We need a bunch of them. So it's just when you look at the that ask, it's just kind of a little shot.
And then finally, when you talk about the psychological testing and it becoming a standard for your department, would this mean that you would require that of your current POs and officers, or new onboards
This
going
would just be new
forward?
hires.
Okay.
Yeah, any approximation of what the cost for the electronic monitoring would be on a single case, for instance?
No, Hans, it's hard to ballpark that. It would kind of depend on the level of monitoring equipment do we want. if we're going with the older style ankle bracelet that responds to a monitoring unit that's plugged into a phone line in the home, we're talking about probably about $3 to $4 a day. I'm looking at a program where we control the number of units, probably no more than 12 to 15 units at a time. But if we want a higher level of technology, then obviously the cost goes up. $10 to $12 per day per offender would be for, GPS level of equipment. And there's other pieces of equipment where you can link it in through their personal cell phone. All of these have advantages, all of them have disadvantages. There may be some conversations I need to have with the district attorney of what they would like to have available and the judges. If you are anticipating hooking up a higher risk offender, which is where I think we need it, then the cell phone application is probably not appropriate. We're going to be looking at a higher level of responsivity there, which of course is your higher costs.
Okay, thank you.
But I'd be happy to bring all of that forward. What do we as a community expect? How are we willing to pay for it? I think are going to be a couple of key questions there.
Good question. The comparison between, what you're doing, I don't know how to put it, now just personally, personal monitoring compared to electronic monitoring, cost comparisons.
We can't have the officers in the field enough to give us some of the coverage that an effective electronic monitoring program would give us. I mean, if that's kind of what you're alluding to. And we don't, we are not a 24/7 department. Our officers do work off hours, but going out a couple of times a month on an evening or on a Saturday night is still not giving you the same level of supervision.
One more thing. This is in lieu of generally being incarcerated.
Absolutely,
So I mean, the cost comparison could be that
correct.
compared to
There's
the
that as well.
electronic monitoring.
So my anticipation is the program that we would put in place would be that electronic monitoring would be available for, let's say, a domestic violence offender who we may want to have a little bit higher level. Perhaps we're on the fence between an incarceration sentence and a probation sentence. And if having the ability to put this person on electronic monitoring might give us that additional level of security, then maybe the recommendation is probation as opposed to incarceration. The same idea would be for an offender, where perhaps we have a multiple time DWI offender who we're taking in on a violation of probation. And again, this could be a tipping point where instead of incarcerating someone, we are able to keep them in the community with this enhanced level of supervision. Because the other thing probation has to take into account are all of the other unaccounted factors and costs when we incarcerate someone. There's loss of time as a parent, there's loss of employment, there's loss of housing. These are other costs that when we violate someone and we decide to revoke and incarcerate, the children pay, the significant others pay, the families pay, the employers pay. There are other costs associated to these actions.
And sometimes the others benefit.
That is true too, and we also try and be sensitive to that.
Heidi, you have another question?
And it's really a comment. I would assume that, of course, your officers' PSIs would indicate a recommendation based on what they know, when they do those pre-sentence investigations and give that information to the district attorneys and judges.
Absolutely, it would be part of any pre-sentence investigation, and it would also be part of any recommendation in our uniform court reports prepared for violations of probation.
Any other questions from the committee? Not we'll move along and share it.
So in addition to my report, I just have a couple of things. As you know, one of the biggest challenges has been our medical division at the jail. However, we've stabilized that situation. East Hill's out, East Hill Medical did provide some staff that's filled in a number of gaps to help us out, which has been great. Provided some LPNs that are passing medications, and on our end, it's been coming and filling in some gaps when we needed the help, so that's been great. And we did contract, as I reported last time, with AYA Healthcare for a traveling nurse. As of last meeting, they were having difficulty recruiting somebody, but they did recently recruit a nurse that's come into the jail. Last Monday she started, so she's doing great. So we've stabilized that situation. And we'll be coming forward with a resolution next month, looking to amend the nursing salaries, base pay for the nurses, hoping that we can attract some full-time nurses. The contract with AYA, that's not cheap. It's very expensive to bring somebody in to be a traveling nurse, but I don't know, but hopefully we can adjust our salaries, attract some to look at those positions and fill those gaps. So we're doing okay right now. We'll have that resolution next month. The only other thing that I have, body worn cameras. And as you all know, with our community collaborative plan that we did as part of the governor's executive order, we did look at implementing a body worn camera program for our agency. And we had agreed that we would come back to your body with a presentation in regards to costs and pros and cons of implementing such a program. I believe that we suggested September. However, the Department of Justice, we did find that they're offering a grant. That the deadline to apply is August 31st. So I didn't get a chance to reach out to you, Mr. Chair, but I did reach out to our legislative chair yesterday and asked if we could potentially give a presentation at your full legislative meeting this month. So that if there is some interest by the body in pursuing the program, that we would have time to submit a proposal for that grant to see if we could possibly offset some of the costs if we can do that. So my hope is that we can provide that presentation to you at the end of the month at your full meeting and have some discussion about that and see if we want to move in that direction. Other than that, I don't have anything else, and happy to take any questions if you have any.
Why couldn't you just apply for the grant and let the process flow as it's normally going to do? I mean, if you apply for the grant, doesn't mean you guarantee you're going to get it. And second of all, if you do get it, you always get it. So
We certainly can. I felt that if we're going to apply, if it appears that we have legislative support, I think it would be helpful for us to indicate, that in our application. But you're correct. We can certainly apply for that and not accept the funding later down the road. If we decide not to do that.
just a straw poll. I mean, without hardly any information, I mean, where does the committee stand on it right now with the body worn cameras? Support or not support?
Support from me.
I was gonna ask, unless you have really changed your opinion, this is something you think would be of value to the department.
I think it would be of value to the department, the community, and really to the
Your office.
legislature. I look at the liability. To have that piece of evidence is the best piece of evidence that you're going to get. In many cases, it may protect us when it comes to liability. I know a number of agencies have implemented them, have seen a reduction in their personnel complaints and issues that they have because everybody involved in those incidents realized that the whole thing's being recorded. So I think you're going to find from the presentation that there's a lot of pros to implementing this type of program. One of the biggest things for me is that everybody today out there has a camera in their pocket. So they can record anything that we do.
Any piece
However,
of it.
Well, and that's the biggest issue is they may record a 15-second piece of it. And that's what, you see the headlines, incidents that happen across the country. It may be that 15-second snippet, but if you don't have that body worn camera footage, you don't get a vision of what actually happened, that led up to that or what the full piece of that is. So I'm a strong proponent of it. And I can tell you that our road patrol division actually the majority of our members do want those cameras. They see the benefit in that too. I think there's a benefit to all of us. I think that, it's well worth the investment in this day and age, because one critical incident that's not documented properly could be a catastrophe when it comes to liability. So I would ask that, please consider, seeing the presentation, digesting the pros and cons, and then I think we could have a much better discussion after you see that.
I don't think it can probably ever hurt a good officer. Your hand was coming out.
I'm gonna be the devil's advocate
Sure.
and ask, how many incidents have we had that, where would have made a difference in the last 2 years?
As far as like evidence wise or personnel complaint wise,
Whatever, just, what would have done us good to have invested in this program?
I can't give you statistics or data related to that. I could try to figure out a way to answer that question, but I guess, anecdotally, I would say that, I would look at many times where it would have been a great piece of evidence for us to actually have the footage of what happened at that particular location. But I can't answer as far as like, would it have limited personnel complaints or, knock on wood, we haven't had a national incident that made national news that, we wish we had the full body worn camera footage on, but I mean, that could happen 5 minutes from now, we might be headed to that call. So I just think in this day and age that we really need to do that. And I also think it's likely that at some point the state's going to mandate that all agencies have cameras. I think that's coming. I don't know when or if, but I think just given the state of everything that's coming, but I think honestly, I think it's a good thing for all of us.
That was basically your question, do we have a lot of incidents? Not tonight, my knowledge, just, the last 8 years, let's say, very few, just, at least have become public, so, I can see it could be an aid, yes, but, is it really worse? It's gonna be thousands of dollars, and Jay might be in the same, position, as far as,
Why are you smiling, Jay? 'Cause,
everybody having body cameras.
over here just keeping my mouth shut and my head down.
But as the sheriff mentioned, he has a grant that he can,
Yeah, I know,
take advantage of to fully fund.
but
Not to fully fund,
Oh,
so, but to offset some of the costs. I mean, there's, like anything, grants cover part of the cost, or maybe they cover the full cost, but in the end, you bear some cost eventually, right? And I'm well aware of that, and, cognizant that, we want to try to do everything we can to, be aware of our budget, but I truly am concerned in this day and age with everybody having a cell phone that, they've got their little snippet of video and we just don't. And I think that we owe it to our people that we're putting out there every day dealing with these incidents and, the people that we serve to have that evidence.
If I may, to kind of pick up on, not that I want to jump off the dock into these waters necessarily. There has been, the water's cold, the water's deep, and I'm a little bit more guarded in my view of body worn cameras than the sheriff. Following the issue now for several years, there have only been a couple of probation departments in New York State that have trialed body worn cameras so far, and none of them have adopted them. OPCA has not come out with any guidance specific to probation officers wearing cameras in the field. And the governor's executive order doesn't cover us at this point in time. I would suggest to this body that as you are having this conversation and considering going down this path, that you kind of consider probation on a parallel track. You will have 12 other officers out there that are county employees that are carrying firearms. Fortunately, we have not had a single use of force incident in a very, very long time. We have had one incident during my tenure. It was not a use of force incident, but there was a personnel complaint against a probation officer that if we had body worn footage, it would have completely exonerated that officer who was accused of saying some inappropriate things. But that is the only incident. I do believe that sooner or later, there is probably going to be something from the state that will obligate all police and peace officers to have body worn cameras. We obviously conduct our business differently in the community than the sheriffs do, or uniform law enforcement. I would hope that if the body decides that probation should be issued with this equipment, that we're given the opportunity to craft our own policy related to in relation to how they're used and when. All body worn cameras are not created equal. There are great differences in the acuity of the lens, whether you have a discretionary policy of when the camera is on, does the officer control it? Is audio activated? Is it discretionary on the wearer? The light sensitivity for the individual lenses. It has, depending on the quality and the level of equipment that is used, it has the ability to misinterpret or misrepresent what the officer sees naturally. What's the ambient lighting at 3 o'clock in the morning? Is the lens sensitive enough to pick up a lot of ambient light? Does it magnify that? Does it not? There's some very good work out on body worn cameras by the County Sheriff's Association. I attended a presentation in Syracuse several years ago by a number of sheriffs that gave very, very good opinions on this equipment. So I am a little bit more tempered in my view of body worn cameras at this point in time. So I would respectfully request that you don't forget about us and you may consider probation during your deliberations. But I'm not jumping up and down to take my people down this road at this point in time.
So you haven't seen our presentation yet.
Good point, Fred. I'll wait here.
I could definitely see where a lot of the lenses that we have today can see things that a human being really can't see necessarily certain times. Cameras have really come a long ways. So I don't know, I would suggest that proceed with the grant anyhow, but anybody, any of the committee members think that the sheriff's department should not.
I don't know. Your point is you want to do some education.
I'd like to have a discussion with the presentation as to, the benefits and, pros and cons that we may have and go from there.
But it won't be cheap. I mean.
And we'll have
maybe
time.
it's-
We'll have time to give the presentation and get the grant application in after that.
Right, that was my concern.
Sure, and the
Giving you
decision
the
doesn't
time.
have to be made at the end of the month. I mean, we can start the discussion certainly and move that forward. But I was hoping to do that before we submit the grant application, so you can see where we're at.
As you said, you had committed to come back with the budgetary information as part of the executive order anyway. Just say, here's what we have decided would be the overall cost of the program.
That's correct. I believe that was September, if I remember right, that we said we would come back and do that. So I was just looking at that 1 month.
Any other questions for the sheriff from the committee? Is there any other business?
We have one resolution.
Okay.
Is he on?
Somebody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt the updated FEMA 2020 hazard mitigation plan for Cayuga County.
Mr. Didio seconds it. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Carried. Any other business for the committee? Was that a motion to adjourn, Mr. Didio?
Yes.
And a second for all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you. job, Brandon.
The record.
Everything was in that.